Hi guys, welcome to this episode of Sustainable Stace. We're going to learn today about what to do if suddenly you wake up and spring is on its way. What should I do now? Spring is coming. We're going to cover that today so you can be ready to rock into spring. Stay tuned.
I'm Stacy Taves. For me, healthy food and sustainability are totally connected. You can grow it yourself. Nature is generous.
Hey, welcome back to Sustainable Stace, and what should I do now that spring is coming? Most people would think I would jump them into the garden and we'd start talking about plants. But before you're going to get healthy plants, you're going to need healthy soil. So as soon as I see spring is on its way, what I start thinking about is building more soil, like getting compost beds activated and making sure all of my soil is safe in my garden so that I'm going to have the healthiest soil possible for the healthiest plants possible. So I always start spring with my compost heap. I empty out my compost bin that I've been collecting the household compost in over the winter, and I bring it in and I mix it with chicken manure from my chickens. It's great if you can get manure or compost from someone else if you don't have it yourself. And then I mix it a few different ways. This is a forkful out of my garden and it's full of worms. And this is a forkful out of my household composter added to the chicken manure. I get that all going together and mix it up. And when it's all mixed up properly, I'm doing it kind of an accelerated version for the video, then I would cover this, because you got to think of a compost pile as a living organism. I'd cover it with plastic, and then I'd cover it with coffee sacks, and it'll start to warm up as spring temperatures start to rise. And in this way, I'm getting ready for spring by making sure I'm building healthy soil. That's the most important thing, getting ready for spring. So in the continued quest for healthy soil, I've got actually 4 of these separate compost bins, and every one would hold, 5 or 6 wheelbarrows full of soil. My goal is that I want to add a few inches of healthy compost every season to every one of my raised garden beds so that all of them can keep on getting healthier nutrients, balance their pH, and get everything that the plants needs. That this isn't really about needing fertilizer anymore, it's just healthy soil is going to create healthy plants. So I'll show you what I got going on here. If you don't have access to coffee sacks, which I consider kind of magical, over a year's time they turn into soil themselves, so they're like slow release compost. Underneath these coffee sacks I have a sheet of plastic that holds in moisture, and when it starts to heat up in the compost pile, the plastic holds in the moisture so you don't have to water your compost pile. It's not going to dry out. And then when you get into here and start digging, you see there's manure, there's household compost, there's a lot of bark chips that I get from people. I put in old pieces of cardboard so that they can break down as well. And when you get into here, you start to find lots of worms. So those worms are going to be the key to making it all work. You get those worms going into your garden as you moved your compost in. They're going to do all the rototilling and tilling for you in a much more gentle way so that you don't have to use a shovel or a pitchfork or a rototiller in your garden. The worms will be tilling everything up and breaking it down. The presence of worms is a great indicator of soil health in your garden. So build soil as spring approaches. As spring approaches, the next thing you're going to find me doing is visiting my rhubarb. So here you can see the little nubs of the rhubarb just starting to show up. So as winter's coming on, rhubarb kind of disappears and goes underground, a little bit incognito until spring shows up, and then it's one of the first things to start sprouting in the springtime. So I put a stick by every rhubarb plant to mark where it's going to be. So now that it's coming up, I know where it is. I won't accidentally harm it in any way. There's one little weed I want to pull out. So now what I want to do in spring for my rhubarb, because I'm in the shadow of a massive tree here which always acidifies the soil, is I give it a little sprinkling of lime, which I know is going to help balance out the pH in it. And then I take some of the compost that I've made over the winter and I basically surround it. Not smother it, but surround it with compost. And I make sure, if I don't have it already, that there's coffee sacks or cardboard around it so that it's not going to have to compete with weeds. And you'll notice that my rhubarb already has a drip irrigation line going right past it. So when it does get dry and the moisture starts dissipating in the hot months, I can tip that on maybe once a week and give it a little bit of a drink. That rhubarb is ready to go for the season. I've just activated my rhubarb as spring approaches. So guys, welcome to the part where we show you what's been going on. This is my rhubarb bed now after it's been activated. Each of the plants has been covered with compost, the watering lines there, The sacks are all around it, and basically moisture is guaranteed to be preserved. The nutrition's going to be going at the root systems, and all the rhubarb now can grow, and it's got no competition with weeds, and it's got maximum moisture and nutrition. So it's a beautiful thing. Right when it's like this is also a wonderful time to transplant rhubarb, and I've shown you how to do that in another video. Check it out there on rhubarb. And if you basically just take that whole plant and you want it all moved, shovel it all out. If you want half of it moved and half of it remaining here, just use a shovel to cut the underground root system in half. Either way, it's going to work well. As long as you keep it moist, it should transplant successfully. So rhubarb's ready to roll. Back to thinking about soil and getting ready as spring's approaching. The next thing I'm going to do is kind of retire what was a winter veggie bed. We've had a fairly cold winter where we're living. Snow still came this last week. Frost is coming and going. I did have some covers over with hoop houses, some remake cloth on this bed, but this bed's pretty much done. I still have lots of fresh chard like this, and I just want you to see it so you know what's talking, because it's February, but I've still got nice fresh chard. I'm eating good stuff like this every day out of my garden. I'm not going to get rid of these plants, but there are other plants that are in here, and some of them are done. And if you see down here, this is a sprouting broccoli that's all finished. Now, one of the key things to realize when you're putting a garden to rest, and basically I'm going to give this a 3-month break. What I'm going to do is I'm going to chop any large plant that's basically done. I'm not going to uproot it. I want to leave the roots in the soil. I'm going to chop it down, lay it there. It's just called chop and drop. That's the best thing to do. Cover it with a layer of compost, some cardboard, some coffee sacks, and it's going to have 3 months just to chill. So we'll have March, April, and May, and during those 3 months, I'll just let it rest. It's going to recover, but I'll leave little plants like this chard poking through the cardboard. I'll work around those plants, so there will be little bits of plants I can still pull out and harvest from, while the primary major plants that were in this bed will be gone, and they'll decompose and break back down. So just kind of letting the soil rest, replenishing the nourishment by giving it some compost, protecting it from the elements. And even here you can see I've got things like coffee sacks that have been here all winter, so that the elements haven't been hitting the soil. It's been protected and sheltered with a blanket, and that's what's keeping the plants healthy right through the cold winter months. Okay guys, and here we are now at the chop and drop bed. We've gone through it all. Any plants that were looking good we've kept. There's some sprouting purple cauliflower, there's different colors of chard, there's some kale still growing, it's doing great. But this has all had a load of chicken manure and a load of compost put on it, cardboard and sacks. The irrigation lines are still running underneath, and it's going to have 3 months to chill. So we chop and drop, we cover it, and it chills. That soil is going to grow all sorts of microorganisms. It's going to gain all sorts of health and competencies. And as it gets ready and gets bolstered and the weather warms up, I'll be able to pull the sacks back, just penetrate the cardboard where I want to put sacks or starts. And this is going to be a rockin' bed come June. It gets to finish off the winter, growing a bit of food, but mostly recovering for the next food it's going to grow. Another wind in the garden. Oh, what else to do if spring's coming your way? Well, I would say if spring's coming your way, you better think about your perennials. Those wonderful plants in your garden that are a gift of nature that every year keep on showing up and performing. Here I am with a rhubarb plant. Doesn't look like much. We've got brand new growth that's going to produce fruit. If you cut it, you'd see nice living wood. And you've got last year's wood that's already finished, and it's not going to produce anything more. So I want to think about the plant above the ground, but I also want to address the soil below the plant so that it's going to be really healthy, well insulated and nourished. So this is a little bit of what I would do. First of all, I obviously need to know, like I said, what's last year's growth and what's this year's growth. And this is evidently last year's growth. So I'm pulling that out. And as I pull that out, it creates space. And what you really want as you come into the season, oh, this has got a tie on it, is you want to create a location for 3 or 4 healthy canes above the soil to produce fruit for this season. So right now I've got 3 healthy ones here and a 4th here, and I would say this 4th one I don't want. It's this year's growth. You can see it's nice and new. It's looking healthy, but it's a little smaller, right? You also want to stimulate some growth on these guys, so I'm just going to top them a little bit. That's going to get them rocking a little harder. And I do an angular slice so that if water hits them, it won't go into the cane. So that's the pruning part, right? So now what am I going to do around the soil? Well, you can see there's a few weeds that are coming up here. I'm not going to pull them in any way. I've got nourishment. So first I'm going to take some of the compost that I've made and I'm going to put it around the plant so that it's got a nice, rich, thick layer of nourishment around it, right? Oh, it smells like life. Then I'm going to take some cardboard, because cardboard's going to keep that in. It's going to suppress the moisture. And I'm basically just going to take pieces of cardboard that are going to create a nice buffer around it, like that. Can do that on both sides of the plant. I didn't pre-cut it, as you can tell. And when that's like that and it's holding all the moisture in and it's suppressing all the weeds, then I would take coffee sacks like this and I'd probably put them between the plants so that they'd be extending in both directions. And as a result, it's going to keep the cardboard down. If it's a windy day, the cardboard won't dry out and fly away, so you'll start getting something like that. And then I would, that's the beautiful thing about coffee sacks, is they're modular. You got your next plant right next to you, pack it right in. My irrigation line runs underneath here as well, right? So you put on some water every 2 weeks or so, that's great. The final thing you want to think about is tying up your raspberries, and this is a part that can get away on you. It doesn't look like much right now, but boy, when these start to grow leaves and then the wind comes and maybe there's even some fruit sitting, all of a sudden your raspberry canes are going to start tipping sideways and they can actually break. So then it's really important that you have lines. You can see they've got a little piece of wire here, and I just tie the raspberries right on there, and you can use string or twine. You don't want to tie them really tight, just enough to hold them, and that way if it's windy they'll be held up, but they can move around a little bit and not break. So look at what we've done, eh? We've taken away the old wood, we've tied up the new wood, we've put on nourishment, cardboard, and coffee sacks, and this little plant, I guarantee you, is going to have a stunning year. All I have to do now for the rest of the season is pick fruit, and I'll come back around this time next year and give it some love as spring approaches. So that's one of our perennials. Let's look at another one. So this is pretty simple, right? Even Soda Pop can figure it out. Once I've pruned away all of last year's dead wood that produced fruit, and I've kept last year's new wood that's going to produce fruit for this year, it looks very sparse. Everything's tied up now so that as leaves come on and it catches wind on a windy day, when it's got fruit and it gets heavy, it's not going to fall over. It looks meager, it looks sparse, but I've got healthy soil. And if you look down below here, I've arranged things. The goal in mind is don't do any weeding all season and do as little watering all season as possible. And that's just by mulching and getting layers on. The roots are insulated. There's no real weed opportunity because there's no light, no air getting at the weeds. Everything's covered up, cardboard and coffee sacks. These raspberries are ready to just burst with fruit. We're glad about that because raspberries are a fave. Oh, and if you know Sustainable Stace, you know I love garlic. This is my bed with hardneck garlic in it, and it came up beautifully. I'm so impressed every spring to come into it and go, look at all those little beauties. They all took off and did wonderfully, like every single one. And you can see I have irrigation lines that I put down, which I'm not at all using now in spring when it's cold. You can even see there's still ice and snow on the ground. But what it did is it created perfectly straight lines, did the spacing of basically one fist between each clove as I put them in. But this soil is exposed and it shouldn't be right now. It should be covered up. So you've got a few choices and they can be somewhere between inexpensive and free. One is just to use leaves or leaf mulch if you have access to it. And so you can just put leaves and leaf mulch down beside your plants like this. And in so doing, you're going to insulate the garlic cloves as they're developing. You're going to insulate the soil and it's going to just produce a lot better. The other thing to do that works really well is straw. And if you get straw in between your cloves like that, you'll just see their little crowns poking out through there, and the straw will do a beautiful job of insulating the soil as well. Both leaves and straw hold in a lot of the moisture as well, so you won't need to water as much. And I would say generally for me, I harvest my garlic in late June, early July. Last season was a moderate year for moisture, and I never had to irrigate my garlic as well at all. I planted it in the fall in October. I harvested it in late June, and I never had to water it at all. But the watering line is there to plant the next crop as well. That's beautiful. And just another thought, don't put green lawn clippings or anything green as your mulch, because that green means nitrogen, and when that nitrogen is being converted into the soil, it kind of locks up all the energy and nutrients in the soil. You need something dead that doesn't have any more life in it as your mulch that goes between your rows. But if you do that, it's very quick to put straw down in between your garlic rows, and they're gonna thank you for it. You'll just be so grateful for the opportunity to pull that garlic out of that straw or the leaves, and that will have actually built your soil up in the process of mulching. So another great way to respond when you see spring's coming. There is something to do, and it's usually coming down to, how do I create healthy soil and ready the soil to produce healthy food? So then we're gonna talk in closing about that straw on the garlic that I mentioned to you. This makes such a difference on the quality of your garlic harvest, how little you have to fertilize it, how little you have to water it, and the fact that with a good straw covering or leaf mulch covering, you also don't have to weed it. It's amazing. Now I have this bed here, and I think this has about 700 or 800 heads in it. There's another bed behind me that has the same. The two have about 1,500 heads. So you can see I've planted these beds pretty tight. I've mentioned before that I have irrigation lines inside, so I have nice straight rows, and I've put rows or pairs of rows around each irrigation line. So there's two here, two there, two there. Very tightly spaced, just a fist space apart, but they're gonna get to full size, which is obviously the goal. And I used, this is what I wanna emphasize, only half a bale of straw to do all these beds. Just a bit over a half a bale of straw to mulch 1,500 heads of garlic. So that's not a whole lot of expense if you have to go buy your straw. It's not a whole lot of leaves if you have to go rake some leaves, to get an incredible return on way less work, way less water, way less weeds to contend with, and every head of garlic, because of no competition with weeds, is gonna be a little bit bigger as well, because it doesn't have to fight for nutrition. So there you are, right? We've locked down a winter bed. We've looked at putting together the raspberries at the start. We've got the rhubarb tied in, and we recognize the garlic gets the straw or the leaf mulch, and everybody's winning. Keep on reminding you, please remember, soil's key. You get healthy soil, you get healthy food, you get healthy Stace. That's the way Sustainable Stace rolls, guys. We gotta get the soil working so that everything else works as well. I hope you guys have really enjoyed this episode of Sustainable Stace. What do you do when spring's coming, and how to get ready and activate your soil and your garden for the arrival of spring, so that you don't have fear and dread, but you have wonder and you embrace spring as it hits you as a wonderful season of opportunity. If you've been watching this video on YouTube, thanks very much for watching. Just want to encourage you to please look down there in your bottom right hand corner, subscribe there, so that every time we at Sustainable Stace pump out another video resource to you, you'll get it in your email inbox, and you'll be subscribing and getting every one of the resources we try to pull together for you to be helpful and hopeful and healthy. Hope that works out for you. Thanks for watching.